Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Mark-Coleman, and he's here today to share with us his new book, From Suffering to Peace, The True Promise of Mindfulness. Now, Mark is the author of Make Peace with Your Mind and Awaken the Wild. He's the founder of the Mindfulness Institute and has an MA in clinical psychology. Mark has guided students on 5 continents as a corporate consultant, counselor, meditation teacher, and wilderness guide. So let's welcome to the show, Mark-Coleman.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, what an honor it is to spend this time with you. And I always love reading your book. So I was so excited to hear that you had another book and just came out today.
Yes, very excited. The book is finally launched, and it's a great deep dive into what is now a very popular subject on mindfulness. When I first started writing, my first book came out in 2006, Awaken the Wild, and mindfulness was not that well known. And now, of course, in the last 12 years, we've had a huge explosion of interest in mindfulness. And one of the reasons I chose to write this book, having been teaching for 20 years, is just some concern about when anything grows in such popularity as quickly as mindfulness does. Sometimes the depth and the meaning and the subtlety and the context of the practice can be overlooked. So I wanted to really explore this theme from the perspective of the tradition that I come from, which is the Buddhist tradition, but really make these deep teachings of mindfulness and its potential as a liberating practice accessible to as many people as possible.
Well, I'm so glad that you did this because I practice mindfulness as part of my journey. And you're right. I mean, there's so much hype out there about it today. It's almost like a keyword that kind of gets thrown around. And for our listeners that are new to mindfulness, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so mindfulness is it's a multifaceted thing. So it is both a quality, it's a practice, it's a training, it's a state of being. But in a very ordinary way, mindfulness is simply the capacity to be aware. It's a clear awareness. It's a knowing of what's happening as it's happening. And in respect to ourselves, it's really the clear awareness of our physical, mental, emotional experience, and also awareness of our environment and others. And so it's that quality that allows us to know and be present. It's what allows us to be in the present moment and to be clear and understanding of what's happening, which, some of your readers or listeners might think, well, so what? I do that. But if anybody pays attention, we know that it's very obvious that it's actually very hard to sustain attention, and that mostly our attention is lost in the past, lost in the future, worrying, planning, ruminating, catastrophizing. And so mindfulness is both a quality, as I said, it's a capacity to be aware, but also it's a training that trains us how to be present, how to sustain awareness in the present moment, how to, intimately know ourselves and our mind and our habits and our heart and its emotions. And then also gives us the ability to not just be present to experience, but also allow a wiser response. And so often in life we are, pushed and pulled around by events and people, and we get reactive and we get angry or hurt or upset. And so mindfulness also allows that awareness to know what's happening, to know often why we get triggered and reactive, and also to find a more reasoned, balanced response.
What a great place to be in and come from when you're really present in the moment and not taking things in a personal way or, in destructive ways. It really allows a person to really be there fully and hear what's happening.
Right. As I'm sure you have the experience, so often we're talking to people, especially now because of our phones and technology, people are rarely present. And it's become, in this digital economy, actually in-person present moment conversations and contact is becoming a rarefied thing. And so what mindfulness does with its training and the practices is it allows us to be really present to our kids and to our partners and to our colleagues and to what's happening in the world. And, so much unnecessary pain happens because we're not present, whether it's because we're driving and distracted, or we're just not present in the conversation, or we're not present to ourselves and we don't listen to our body and its needs for rest or for good food or for exercise. So mindfulness, I think one of the reasons it's become so popular is because it is this quality that impacts every aspect of our life, whether it's our health or our mental habits or our relationships or ability to stay grounded in the midst of chaotic situations. And so, hence the popularity and hence the need to really know what this practice is, which the book really describes as many practices and tools in the book that give a very clear guide to what the practice is, how to develop it, and how to apply it in all the many situations we find ourselves in life.
Well, I know you've been on the leading edge of mindfulness for quite some time. One of the people that really have been not just writing about it, but living it. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners, what really started you on your own mindfulness path?
Yeah, well, I had the good fortune of stumbling, not exactly accidentally. I was a very unhappy college student. I was an angry young man. I was a punk rocker and a little wild and crazy and confused. And I was really looking for something that would help me with my own mental suffering. And I happened to be living next to a Buddhist meditation center in the East End of London back in the early 80s, which was quite unusual then. Mindfulness and meditation was not popular. It was considered slightly strange and esoteric. And they happened to be teaching the practice of mindfulness and the practice of loving kindness, which is a lovely complement to mindfulness practice. And I very quickly realized that, these tools of meditation, of mindfulness, which really is in meditation, turning our attention inwards, turning our awareness to really look and feel and understand and experience ourselves. They're like, these hidden keys that unlock a lot of the challenges that we face, both personally, existentially, psychologically. And I realized that most of my suffering was actually coming from my own mind, whether it's from my negativity, my self-judgment, my reactivity, and the mindfulness meditation practice helped me kind of illuminate some of those patterns. And once we bring something like that into awareness, it allows us to understand them, allows us to let go of them, or to transform them. And so that was when I was 19, and I've been developing and studying and training in those practices for the last few decades. And it's been very invaluable support in my life and also for my teaching.
Mm. Well, I love how you have each chapter of the book talks about a different practice. And some of them were pretty new to me. And I don't know it all, but I love reading. And I was real impressed with just the content of your book. You talk about embodied awareness, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners what that means.
Yeah, so embodied awareness is, one facet of mindfulness. So contrary to the popular myth of meditation being this blissful, out of the body, floating in celestial cloud realms, for me and for most people that I know, mindfulness is very much a present moment practice where you're partly utilizing the experience of the body as a support to be present. So when we're paying attention to our physical experience or to our senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, that very simple act of attention brings us into the present moment. And so the body becomes a great vehicle and support for mindfulness. If we're present to our physical experience, it means we're present. Most of us, most of the time, spend our time and our attention lost in our thoughts and in our plans and daydreams and fantasies. rarely actually in the physical present. So if we can learn how to train our attention to ground in the body, and so in meditation, that's typically the breath, or being aware of the body sensations. When we're not meditating, it's being aware of our body moving, walking, breathing, etc. The more that we can attune to our physical experience, the more that we're naturally cultivating this mindful attention. And so the beauty of that, rather than thinking of meditation as this thing that you do to remove yourself from life, the more that you cultivate mindfulness of the body, or this embodied awareness, as I call it, the more that we can learn to be present, standing at the bus stop, taking our kids to school, walking down the rows of the supermarket, playing tennis, or whatever it is that we're into, walking around in the office, going to get a cup of coffee. The more that we can attune and be present to our physical experience of sitting, looking, breathing, moving, hiking, the more we're cultivating mindfulness in a very simple, accessible, moment-to-moment, day-by-day way.
I love that. And I love how you're starting off with the walking meditation so that people can be present and really get into that practice of doing that. Because, gosh, what a powerful practice walking meditation is.
Right. And we have this notion that meditation means sitting still, closing your eyes. But actually, more than the word meditation, the word I prefer to use is meditative awareness, which is mindfulness, which is the quality of attention or presence that comes from meditation. And ideally, we're learning to cultivate that in every moment. So whether we're in meditation or walking the dog or going for a run or cleaning the car or whatever it is, that we can stay as present, theoretically, as we are in meditation. And so, so walking and I've trained in that practice now for 25 years, where you simply be present to the physical experience of walking, which we don't tend to do because our brain figures out how to do that without us focusing on it. But when we learn to just simply be present while we're walking, that short walk to the bus stop or to the office or to the grocery store, that 5 or 10 minutes could be the most mindful you are, the most present you are in the day. And so once we include these more sort of integrated ways of cultivating mindfulness, then the whole day becomes this lovely canvas in which to become more present.
Well, I can't even express how impressed I am with this book. One of the chapters, the practice is attuning to pain with kind attention. And it's interesting. It's not what people think when they think of mindfulness. They're like, well, I've got to pay attention to my pain. Isn't that something I'm supposed to stuff and push away while I have my mind, totally clear?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we have this notion of meditation should be happy and blissy and smiley. And what's radical about mindfulness is it's actually a training in how to be present to life. And life, as you know, is full of joys, full of exciting things, full of challenges, and also the hard stuff, physical pain, emotional heartbreak, loss of loved ones, and all kinds of different things. And so what mindfulness does is it supports it. It's a training in how to be present to whatever's happening, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not. And again, people might be thinking, well, why would I want to be present to pain, or why would I want to be present to a hard time? Well, the truth is that stuff's going to happen. And if we don't learn to be present for it, what normally happens is we're fighting it, we're reacting to it, we're judging it. And so we're not actually, we lose that opportunity in that moment to learn and understand, like when, and there's a story in the book of someone who, had a lot of physical pain in his legs, and neglected his body so much. His body got infections. He eventually got gangrene and had to have amputation. And it was a very, horribly tragic and sadly unnecessary state of affairs. If he'd been more attentive to his body, even if it was unpleasant, he would have maybe listened, maybe been more responsive, maybe got medical help sooner, and would have saved that horrific amputation process. And so that's a kind of a more extreme example. But even in a very simple way, like eating, like so many of us are not present when we eat. We either binge eat, or we overeat, or we're just not present to which foods are good for us and which foods make us bloated or tired, and so just that simple act of being present while eating, is another way to support your body. But going back to the subject around pain, the more that we can learn to be present to that, hold that, the more we have capacity and courage and actually even a sense of fearlessness, because it's training us how to be present to anything, even if it's hard.
Well, and that's what life is. I mean, your book is really for everyday life. It's being able to go through the pain and the aging and death and different things that come up.
Right. And so sadly in society, with the all of that, the hard stuff, the sickness, the aging, dying, gets glossed over or ignored or sidelined. And then of course we're hopelessly unprepared when tragedy comes. And so mindfulness is really, in its deeper essence, it's a radical looking at, reality. And what reality is, it's everything. It's beautiful and it's challenging and it's delightful and it's hard. And the more that we welcome some of the harder domains, whether that's physical pain, emotional challenges, the ecological crisis or whatever it is, the more likely we are to have the capacity to learn from those things, understand them, and then more importantly, or as importantly, to figure out, well, what's my response? What do I do when I'm triggered or when I'm sad or when I'm feeling down and depressed? If we're turning towards that with awareness, it means there's clarity, there's understanding, and there's more chance of being able to intervene in a more effective way.
Well, and why don't you share with us, because it seems like, we're constantly searching for that pleasure, want to have, that feel good pleasure all the time, and we're pushing away against the pain. How can we avoid being caught in this kind of cycle?
Yeah, well, it is the human predicament. We are, we everybody wants to feel happy and have pleasure, and nobody wants to be down and feel pain. I think every organism, every creature has that orientation. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem with that is when we insist that it's only pleasurable and insist that we don't experience pain or difficulty. And of course, that's very unrealistic and unlikely. And so, I quote that lovely quote from the poet William Blake, who says, he who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. Is a very famous phrase, but basically saying, if we hang on and desperately cling to the joy, we actually destroy the very pleasure that we're experiencing or wanting. And if we are able to appreciate it as it comes and let it go when it goes, then we have much more access to a sense of well-being, because we can appreciate the beauty and the sunset and the children playing and the various successes we have. But we also know that everything is temporary, and we can learn to let go when they pass and meet the next moment, which might not be as glorious or as beautiful. And in the same way, when we're in a difficult, challenging place, we know that that's also not going to last. We know that things change, and even when we're in the darkest and bluest place, we might know it. We can understand that it's cyclical, and awareness allows us to see that and to see the next wave. So it allows a beautiful fluidity and responsiveness to our experience.
There's something to be said by, sometimes just accepting what is and moving through that, as opposed to trying to push things away.
Right. And, and the beautiful thing about mindfulness is it's a training in acceptance. I'd say the first quality that we need with mindfulness is we first meeting experience, whether it's our breath or our body pain or a beautiful sunset. And the second quality that's we bring to that awareness is acceptance. We're just allowing what's here to be here. And so much of our unnecessary stress we cause ourselves is we're busy fighting, resisting, and rejecting what's here. And of course, that's sort of pointless because it's already here. So first we have to accept it, allow it, and then we can learn how to, respond effectively.
In your book, you talk about self-judgment, which I thought was really it's just interesting because I think everyone goes through portions of their life where they're kind of judging themselves, but you talk about it as being an epidemic. I'd love for you to expand on that.
Sure. Well, I've been teaching for 20 years, mostly in the mindfulness meditation world, but also in many organizations across the world. And one of the things that I see that causes people the most distress, the most unnecessary self-created suffering and angst is the way that we judge ourselves, the way that we're harsh, critical, mean, apply impossibly high standards to ourselves, belittle ourselves, compare ourselves negatively to others. And all of this is just a mental habit that we've learned usually from childhood, usually from parents or other caregivers. And when I work with students, I see that it's one of the greatest sources of suffering is that negative voice in our head that's constantly telling us or reminding us we're not good enough, we're stupid, we should have done something different, look who's better than us. And so what's powerful about mindfulness, and I ended up writing my last book, I think you interviewed me about my last book, Make Peace with Your Mind, about how to work with the inner critic. I wrote that book because I just saw how pervasive this issue is with self-judgment. And I also speak to it a fair amount in this current book, From Suffering to Peace, because it is one of those things that creates a lot of suffering. And unless we start to pay attention, unless we start to notice it with awareness and to let it go, to challenge it, to orient towards ourselves with a kinder, more accepting, more loving presence, then we're just continuing this habit of causing unnecessary strife for ourselves. And so the beautiful thing about mindfulness is it develops that self-awareness so we can listen to that negative voice and then learn how to let it go.
Do you find that cultivating a practice of mindfulness helps us to become more kind, not only to ourselves, but to others?
I do. I know that from my own experience, and I know it from watching, thousands of students over the years. And how that happens is when and this has been well chronicled in the research, that mindfulness is a primary building block for empathy, which sounds slightly counterintuitive because we associate mindfulness with introspection. But how that works is when we become aware of ourselves, whether it's our mind and our body and our heart and our struggles and our challenges, the more that we understand that in ourselves, the more that we can therefore have empathy. We can put ourselves in the shoes and the experience of somebody else. And so as we learn to work with our own challenges and stresses and pain and suffering, it just grows our capacity to feel empathy and care for others who are going through the same stuff. And so that phrase, treat others as you would like to be treated, mindfulness helps grow that awareness of how we like to be treated and what's helpful and what's not. And so we just become more sensitive. As we become more aware, we might see, for example, typical office culture might be quite gossipy or backbiting, or there's often a culture of negativity and putting people down. As we become more mindfulness, we become more attuned, more sensitive, more aware, and we realize, I actually don't really want to be sort of partaking in that, because usually the consequence of that negative communication is someone gets hurt. And so just in those small ways, we start to be a little kinder. Or the other thing is we just start to notice, like, usually we're lost in our own stories and dramas and thoughts. And when we become more mindful, we actually look around and we can see people more clearly. We can see when someone's suffering or hurting or feeling left out or sad. And so in that way, in a very simple way, it allows us to be responsive.
I would agree with you.
And kinder. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when we really look at our own actions and what we involve ourselves in. And for me, gossip, when I was younger was kind of a thing. I mean, I was involved in that and, shamefully so. And it's like, oh, but when I started making those adjustments and going, gosh, I really don't want to be involved in these kind of discussions, people stopped coming to me to engage in that. And life got a lot easier.
Right. Yeah. And then you start to attract people who have more positive communication, who are not, driven by those same habits. And you end up having a more positive circle. I mean, I found this when I was at college. I started meditation when I was young and I was 20 and, I noticed after becoming more mindful that most of the conversation my friends at college was pretty negative. And I just decided, I don't really want to be around that. That's kind of like not constructive, not helpful. It's kind of mean to other people. And I just started to, withdraw from those conversations and then start to be around people who were not engaging in that. And I thought that was actually much more satisfying rather than just being, sort of resorting to the lowest common denominator, which was, backbiting and gossip and negativity, and which ultimately doesn't feel that good. And that's the other thing about mindfulness is we start to become aware of the habits that we get involved in. And, so that simple example of gossiping and backbiting, it sort of might feel fun on one level, but if we really pay attention, it's also closing down our heart to people. It's putting others down. It has the risk of hurting others. And at a certain point, we just don't want to, we see that that's unnecessarily painful.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, it's interesting in corporate environments and business environments, you do see a lot of that going on, but it just takes one person to change those discussions and change that environment.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think that this book, I loved Make Peace with Your Mind and Awaken the Wild, but I think this book is probably your best book. I love this book. What do you want readers to take away from Suffering to Peace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I'm hoping is that people both find or understand the depth and the range of mindfulness practice. As I said, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of news and hype, as you mentioned, about mindfulness these days. It's, there's lots of research studies coming out and this and that. And what I'm most hoping for is that people realize that there are many ways to cultivate mindfulness practice, but ultimately the practice is about transforming every facet of our lives and really supporting us to work with some of the more difficult, challenging parts of life, but also finding ways to find genuine peace, well-being, insight, understanding, and happiness through the cultivation of awareness, through the cultivation of self-understanding, and can learn how to practice this, in every facet of the life, from the cradle to the grave. I talk about, how to work with some of the harder things in life of grieving and loss and turning towards transience and death. And so I want people to know that these mindfulness practices are very profoundly liberating and profoundly supportive in the midst of the challenges that we meet in life.
Isn't that the truth? My goodness. Well, Mark, as always, I can talk to you forever. I mean, you're such an inspiration, and I just really enjoy our time together. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your new book, From Suffering to Peace, and be part of your community?
Yeah, so the main place to get hold of me is my website, mark-coleman.org, and that's Mark with a K, Coleman.org. And there you'll find information about the book and my teachings and my retreats and meditations and courses and all kinds of things. So that's a good place to connect with me and also find out what I'm doing.
Well, I know you're one busy guy helping a lot of people, Mark, and my goodness, I just so glad we were able to spend time today, especially since your book was just released today. So congratulations and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on your show, and thanks for your good work.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's always such an honor to spend time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, From Suffering to Peace. From Suffering to Peace is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Again, if you'd like to connect with Mark, you can at mark-coleman.org. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.